It's hard to imagine that something as beautiful as chemistry could destroy something as sacred as family. But for Jamie Dornan, that's exactly what happened, or at least, that's what the world believed. The story began years ago, on a movie set drenched in both passion and controversy, 50 Shades of Grey. Jamie Dornan and Dakota Johnson were thrust into roles that demanded vulnerability, intimacy, and trust beyond measure. Overnight, they became one of Hollywood's most talked-about duos, two strangers who made fiction feel too real. From the very first interview, the spark between them was undeniable. Their laughter, the way they finished each other's sentences, the unspoken understanding that flickered in their eyes, it all felt effortless. But that effortless connection came at a cost. Behind the cameras, behind the glamour, a different story was unfolding. One that Jamie never imagined he'd have to face. As 50 Shades became a global phenomenon, the boundaries between acting and reality began to blur. Fans shipped them relentlessly. The media called them Hollywood's secret obsession. Every touch, every glance, every pause in an interview was dissected, slowed down, and analyzed. And somewhere between the noise and the attention, Jamie's marriage, the one thing he always thought was untouchable, began to shake. At home, Amelia Warner watched as her husband's on-screen love story became the center of the world's fantasies. It wasn't jealousy, it was exhaustion. The whispers, the rumors, the constant speculation, they followed her everywhere. Friends, neighbors, even school parents would ask questions she didn't know how to answer. "How does it feel?" they'd say, smiling too politely. "To watch your husband with her?" Jamie tried to protect her. He reminded everyone that his love for Amelia was real, that the films were just fiction. But as the trilogy went on, the connection between him and Dakota only seemed to grow stronger. Even the cast and crew began to notice how they understood each other's moods without words, how their laughter filled the set between takes. It wasn't an affair, but it was something else, something more dangerous. It was emotional gravity. They became inseparable during promotions, traveling together, sitting side by side at interviews, teasing each other on talk shows. Fans adored it. Headlines called them soulmates separated by circumstance. For Jamie, it was all part of the job, or so he told himself. But late at night, when the lights faded and the applause was gone, he began to wonder if he was lying more to himself than to anyone else. Amelia noticed. She always did. The man who once couldn't wait to come home started staying longer on set. The phone calls grew shorter, the silences longer. Every photo of Jamie and Dakota together, smiling, touching, lost in each other's eyes, felt like another crack in a wall she had spent years building. There was one evening that changed everything. Jamie came home from an international press tour, exhausted but distant. Amelia had been waiting. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that screams louder than words. On the table sat a stack of magazines, each one showing him and Dakota, headlines screaming about a love that wasn't supposed to exist. She didn't yell, she didn't accuse, she simply asked, "Do you still know where home is?" Jamie froze. That question haunted him for days. Because deep down, he wasn't sure he had an answer anymore. He began to notice how easily Dakota's laughter echoed in his mind, how her kindness, her vulnerability, her understanding of fame felt like oxygen after years of suffocation. But with every thought of her came guilt, sharp and relentless. He loved Amelia, he loved his children, yet, somehow, everything felt like it was slipping through his fingers. By the time 50 Shades Freed wrapped filming, something had changed in him. He smiled for cameras, hugged Dakota goodbye, and thanked everyone for the journey, but the light in his eyes was gone. The rumors refused to die. In one interview, when a reporter asked if his relationship with Dakota had affected his marriage, Jamie hesitated. Just a pause, a single breath too long. But that was all it took. The tabloids ran the headline the next morning. Jamie Dornan admits, some things went too far. For fans, it was confirmation. For Amelia, it was heartbreak. For Jamie, it was the moment he realized that fiction had finally become real, and that in chasing connection, he might have lost the only thing that ever truly mattered. Because sometimes, you don't have to cheat to lose someone. Sometimes, you just have to forget how to come home. Silence. That was all Jamie Dornan could hear when the noise finally stopped. No cameras, no interviews, no late-night flights or flashing lights. Just silence, the kind that feels like punishment. After the 50 Shades whirlwind ended, Jamie tried to return to normal life, but normal no longer existed. The world had already written its own story. The family man who lost everything because of an on-screen romance. Even when he denied it, no one truly believed him. And somewhere deep down, a part of him wondered if they were right. His home felt colder. The walls, once filled with laughter and music, now echoed with tension. Amelia had taken their children to stay with her parents for a while, not out of anger, but because she needed space to breathe. Jamie didn't fight it. He knew she was right. He had lost her trust, not through betrayal, but through neglect. He spent his nights replaying everything. The long shoots, the shared moments with Dakota that blurred the line between acting and emotion. They were never lovers, but something unspoken had existed between them. A magnetic understanding that neither could fully explain nor control. It wasn't about desire. It was about being seen, understood, in a world where everyone only pretends to care. But Jamie had realized too late that the cost of that connection was everything he'd built outside the screen. Dakota noticed the shift too. The bright smiles they once shared during interviews vanished. She avoided questions about him. In private, she reached out, a message, a call, but Jamie barely responded. Not because of guilt, but because he was drowning in it. He couldn't bear to look at her without remembering what he'd lost. In one quiet moment, a source close to the actor revealed, Jamie said he didn't realize how fragile happiness was until it broke in his hands. He began turning down film offers, isolating himself, and focusing on being a father whenever he could. But every time he saw Amelia, the distance between them felt wider, like two people living parallel lives that would never meet again. Months passed. Then one evening, a mutual friend convinced Amelia to see Jamie again, not as husband and wife, but as two people who needed to talk. They met in a small cafe away from the city. The air was heavy with everything unsaid. Jamie looked tired, older, but his eyes still searched for hers like they always had. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Amelia said quietly, "Do you love her?" Jamie shook his head. "No, I never did. I love what she represented, a world that understood me when I stopped understanding myself. But it was never love." Amelia looked down, tears forming. "You didn't have to love her to lose me, Jamie." Those words cut deeper than any headline. He realized in that instant that losing a family isn't always about betrayal. Sometimes it's about absence. About failing to show up when it matters most. He reached across the table, his voice breaking. "I never meant to hurt you. I just lost control of the story. And somehow, it became bigger than us." Amelia sighed, not in anger, but in exhaustion. "The story didn't break us, Jamie. You did, by forgetting that real life doesn't have a script." They talked for hours that night, not to fix what was broken, but to face it. And when they finally stood to leave, there was no embrace, no promise of reconciliation. Only quiet respect for what they had once been. After that meeting, Jamie made a choice. He disappeared from Hollywood's spotlight for nearly a year. No premieres, no interviews, no glossy covers. He focused on his children, picking them up from school, cooking breakfast, rediscovering the simplicity he'd lost somewhere between fame and fantasy. Reporters occasionally caught glimpses of him, walking alone, sometimes smiling faintly, sometimes lost in thought. But the man who once embodied glamour now seemed grounded, almost ordinary. And perhaps that's what he wanted all along. When asked years later in an interview if he regretted 50 Shades, Jamie paused. Then he said, "No, but I regret who I became because of it. The world loved the version of me that wasn't real, and I let that version win for too long." The host asked if he and Amelia had found peace. Jamie smiled gently. "Peace, yes. Love takes longer." There was no bitterness in his tone, just acceptance. Because sometimes, the greatest act of love is letting go, even when your heart still clings to what was. Today, Jamie Dornan remains one of Hollywood's most private figures, not because he fears the spotlight, but because he's learned what it costs. And somewhere in that quiet, away from flashing cameras and whispered rumors, he's still searching, not for fame, not for redemption, but for the one thing that fame almost took from him forever: the way home.